We are April and Scott, creators of naughtygym.com, and this is The Naughty Gym Show.
For years, we've been fitness and nutrition coaches to thousands of people through our commercial gyms and online platform. We've also spent nearly a decade in an ever-evolving open relationship.
This show brings together two of our biggest passions, fitness and sex positivity. Our mission is to maximize the physical and mental health of anyone brave enough to explore relationship structures that run counter to societal norms.
We have demolished our old ways of thinking about relationships, and from that rubble, built a life full of happiness, adventure, and vitality. And now we want to help you do the same.
So hop on the treadmill, start the show, and let us teach you how to never stop playing. Hi, this is April, and this is the first of two special episodes that we will be releasing this week. Today, you'll be hearing my keynote that opened the week at Be Better Being Bad, and the second we will drop this Thursday, January 15th, and it will be Scott's keynote, The Freedom Mandate, a Concept from Wild Love Theory. Today, you're going to hear my opening keynote titled, What Do You Want? And How Desire Becomes Your Revolution. This talk is about a question I didn't learn to ask for most of my life. What do I actually want? Not what was I raised to want, not what society, religion, or roles told me I should want, and not what would keep everyone else comfortable. In this keynote, I share my own journey of unlearning goodness, approval, and self-abandonment, and what it looks like to slowly rebuild trust with myself through desire, honesty, and listening to my body. I do want to mention that the first few seconds of the recording was cut off, but it doesn't affect the overall message. If this brings up questions, thoughts, or reflections for you, I would genuinely love to hear from you. You can email me anytime at naughtygymonline@gmail.com. Next week, we'll be dropping our full recap of Be Better Being Bad 2026, so make sure to click and subscribe so you don't miss out. Thanks for being here. Hope you enjoy the talk. That was fear. And so what it forced me to do, because I love this man so much, and I also desire my autonomy, it forced me to really dig in and do some work and unearth those things that cause that fear and that anger and whatever those emotions were, those big emotions. And we've been in the lifestyle for 10 years, and so I've already been doing work. Right? You can't be in the lifestyle for any length of time without having some sort of self-awareness, at least not successfully, and without doing work on yourself and undoing some of those conditioned patterns and old habits that don't serve you anymore. So that's kind of where this was born out of, figuring out what I want, some steps that I've taken in my life over the last couple years to figure out what it actually is that I want. Apart from anybody else, what do I want? So I had a conversation a few months ago with a friend who's not in the lifestyle, but he's just a friend that calls every once in a while. And he gets very philosophical, a little bit like Scott sometimes. And at the end of the conversation, he said, April, what is it that you want people to know about you? And I was like, oh, I don't fucking know. I ask other people that question, but I don't know. In order to have an answer to that question, I need to know what it is I want. And so for most of my life, I've been carrying around, and I've talked to Scott and some other people about this, an ache. And that ache inside me wasn't pain, but it was a heaviness. Like there was a part of me that was just outside the edge of my life that I couldn't grasp. And I never really had an answer of what is that? Why do I feel this unsettledness? And psychologists have a name for it. Catherine knows this, self-incongruence. When who you are on the inside doesn't match how you perform on the outside and how you show up for yourself. In simple terms, it's a gap between your real desires, your values, your boundaries and identity, and the roles and expectations, beliefs, and rules that you're pressured to live by. So here's why it feels like an ache. Your nervous system is wired for authenticity. And when you're living out of alignment with that, your body doesn't experience that as neutral, it experiences that as a threat. So I experienced that as a threat, but that ache isn't necessarily weakness, it's information. And when we learn how to process that information, we can show up more clearly for ourselves. So that restlessness, though, if you sit in that ache and you allow that to fester, it can cause anxiety, which I was feeling, sadness, numbness, and disconnecting from your own life. It's basically your inner self saying, this is not the life, relationship, belief system, role, or identity that fits me anymore. And I had already come out of the church. I had deconstructed my faith. I had gone through so much over the last 15 years that I felt, why am I still feeling this ache? What is this? And I didn't have the language for it back then. I do now. And I know I've talked to a lot of you. A lot of you are still feeling that ache, where you're living a version of yourself that just doesn't fit. Maybe you feel like you're making yourself too small, too careful, too edited, too worried about disappointing other people. So when he asked me that, it took me probably a good 2 or 3 minutes of just sitting in silence, thinking, I don't know. He didn't ask, what do you do? What role do you play? What labels help people make sense of you? He asked, who am I? What do I want? What do I want people to know about me that's true? And so I told him, and it didn't make sense, really. I felt like I was rambling, but I told him I want people to know that I love them, that I love people, not just the ones closest to me, but I love people and I want to see them flourish. I want to see them connected. I want them to show up as the most authentic version of themselves and feel like they belong in their own lives. And we do a lot of that in our business. That's what our business is. I love doing that for others, but I wasn't doing that for myself. I spent so many years trying to be who I was supposed to be: a good daughter, a good wife, a good mother, a good Christian, the easy one, the agreeable one, the one who didn't show her emotions because I didn't want anyone to feel uncomfortable. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking myself the important question, what do I want? I know I'm not alone in that. Look like we're fine on the outside. We handle our responsibilities. We take care of our children, our spouses. But what we're talking about today is being the version of you that listens to yourself and sits with yourself and pauses. And I'm going to be honest, that's something for the last couple of years I've been actively working on, but not in like a cute journaling way, in a deep, ugly cry, disoriented, uncomfortable, and very slow way. This is not an easy process. This is not a comfortable. This looks like it can be messy and it's not linear. It can look like a spiral. So apart from my husband, apart from my kids, apart from my family, apart from what society expects out of me, apart from living in Alabama where their idea of what a woman should be is very different than what I think a woman should be. I was raised to believe that I should want a husband and kids. And I love that role more than anything. But I was never asked, is that what you want? I have friends that chose not to have children, and I'm so fucking envious. Not because I don't love my children, but because I didn't know I was allowed to make that decision. I didn't know. Nobody asked, do you want kids? It was just, you get married, you have children. And so I did. Looking back, while I would throw myself in front of a train for my children and grandchildren, I might not have made that same decision if it was up to me completely. We inherited that. So no one ever asked me what else I might want. No one ever taught me how to separate desire from duty, or how to tell the difference between a want that was mine or one that was inherited. So I stopped asking the questions altogether. So this work hasn't been about rejecting my life. It's been about finally meeting myself inside of it and being comfortable with that. And that's why this question matters to me, because desire doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It just waits. And the more I sat with it, the more I realized that this isn't just my work. This is human work. This isn't just women's work, even though I will say, women, I see you. Society puts a big, heavy burden on us and wants us to fit in a box that we shouldn't have to fit into. But I know, because I have 5 brothers and 3 sons and a husband, that men have that as well. You're being told when you go to work, you're in the business world, you're supposed to be head of the household, you're supposed to show up like this in business. You also have this burden. So this isn't about remembering who you are before the world told you to be. This is about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. Desire, self-trust, identity, and belonging to yourself again. So we use labels to explain us, or who we are. We have dating profiles, we have Instagram, Facebook. I'm a mother, I'm a child of God, I'm a wife, I am a coach, I am this, I am that. Whatever the word is, but the moment that we say those labels, society already has an expectation of what that means. Sociologist Irving Goffman wrote about this decades ago. He said, humans create entire identities from one label, even when the assumptions are completely wrong. When Scott and I were outed as swingers in our small conservative town in 2021, everybody thought they knew what that meant. Oh, she's a swinger, which means she's devious, she's a bad mom, she can't be a good wife or a good person, she's a bad entrepreneur, so now we can't go to her business. They were holding their babies closer like I was going to kick them on the way by. You can listen to the podcast if you haven't heard our whole outing story, but labels can be dangerous, they can be useful, but when they can become cages when we forget that we're the one who gets to define what that label means. So I want to begin with 4 questions that have helped me kind of peel back and are still helping me. This is an ongoing process. This never stops. Helps me peel back everything that was not me so that I could finally hear who I was underneath all of it. And that first question is, what would I want if I wasn't trying to be good? If you grew up in church, you know you got to be a good girl, you got to be a good boy. And most of us were raised to be good, not whole, not honest, not fully alive, just good. A good daughter, a good wife, a good mother, a good girl. And if we're being honest, that usually meant that you were behaved and low maintenance. Just be quiet, don't be loud, don't speak your mind. I'm not good at being quiet anymore. Good is rule-based. Nice is approval-based. Kind is truth with care. And here's what I mean by that. Being good is about following rules that you were handed. Being nice is about keeping everybody else comfortable. Kindness requires honesty. It asks you to tell the truth without cruelty, without performance, and without abandoning yourself. I've been praised my entire life for being good and being nice, but no one ever taught me how to be kind to myself. Learning that difference is where everything started to shift. And there's research that backs that up. There's a study in the Journal of Educational Philosophy that found that girls receive significantly more correction than boys, especially when it comes to being assertive. We're bitchy, right? You got to be quiet, don't speak your mind. So we learn early that being good means to be restrained and to be less. But wanting does not live inside the performance of goodness. Wanting lives inside of truth. That's where desire is. So when I stopped trying to be good and I started being honest, everything changed or started changing. It's still changing. If goodness wasn't the goal, what would your desire say? Question 2, and this is one that I had been saying to my children for years. I have 3 boys, and from the time they were little, and I don't know that I even knew what I was saying exactly, but I would say, don't make any decision as if you were going to disappoint yourself. Don't worry about disappointing me, your dad, the church, your teachers. Make every decision so you don't disappoint yourself. So what would I choose if no one would be disappointed in me? This one is shaping our whole life. For years, I stayed in a marriage, 17 years, not because it was alive or connected or fun or loving or sexual or any of those fun things that we have now. But I said, because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. I didn't want to disappoint my mom, who had been married 5 times. And I wore it as a badge of honor. I'm going to stay in this marriage no matter what. I didn't want to disappoint my kids. I didn't want to disappoint the church, where I worked as a women's and children's pastor and was teaching women to suppress themselves for the sake of their marriage. And I didn't want to disappoint my husband. I didn't want to be the one to say that this isn't working anymore. I can't do this anymore, and not stay. So I stayed, and every year that I stayed, I disappeared more and more into myself until I was just a shell of a woman. I was smiling on the outside and disappearing on the inside. And again, I was working at a church where I counseled women to swallow themselves, to temper themselves down and serve their husband and support him and disappear. I reached a point until that became almost physically painful. It was unbearable. And no one asked me to be a martyr. I volunteered for that position. And I carried that same fear of disappointment into the lifestyle and into my marriage with Scott. And there were times where I said yes to sexual encounters when my body didn't want it, because I didn't want to disappoint Scott. I didn't want to disappoint the other couple. I didn't want to mess up the vibe. But I want to be very clear, Scott never pressured me, at least not intentionally. But he's been doing his own work too, unlearning a lot of inherited beliefs about desire and what masculinity actually is and what permission looks like. Psychologist Dana Jack calls this self-silencing. It's one of the fastest ways to disconnect from your desire. I wanted to be the fun partner, the easy partner, the partner who didn't create friction. But every time I said yes when my body said no, I disconnected more. You can't learn what you want while managing everybody else's emotions and expectations. So the second question to ask yourself, what would you choose if no one would be disappointed in you? That answer is desire. That answer is truth. And that is the beginning of coming home to yourself. Question 3 is, what version of myself have I been hiding to make everyone else comfortable? That one stung a lot. There's a version of you that the world sees, and then there's a version of you that lives in private. And maybe your partner gets to see glimpses of that. Hopefully your partner gets to see all of that. Scott sees all of that now, the ugly, the messy, the beautiful, the tired. I hid that loud version of me. Where's Shannon at? That loud laugh. I hid the ambitious version of me because as a woman who owned her own business in a small southern town, that doesn't fare well a lot of times. It doesn't make you friends, that's for sure. So I would hide my ambition. I tempered down my own desires to succeed in order to not feel threatening to others. I hid the emotional version of myself to be more palatable to others. The woman who wanted more. And every time I hid a part of myself, my desire went into hiding, and I felt that ache. Desire cannot survive where you do not feel whole. So ask yourself, who have you been hiding to make other people comfortable? And what would happen if you let that person out into the light? Question 4, what does my body feel when something is right for me? Desire begins in your body. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio found that the emotional decisions start in the body long before the brain can ever catch up. In other words, your body usually knows first. Anybody read the book, Body Keeps the Score? Your chest opens or it closes. Your stomach tightens or it softens. And I ignored these signs for years. So many years that I didn't even know my body was responding. In marriage, in church, in sex, in friendships, in rooms where I made myself smaller. But the body doesn't lie. When something is a no, now I feel it in my gut. I feel it. So now we've named the ache, the conditioning, and the patterns, and the way your body responds and is trying to tell you the truth long before your mind feels safe to hear it. And this is usually where people get stuck. This is where I got stuck. Okay, I know now. Those 4 things, I've identified those. I know, but now what? And I got stuck until my friend asked me that question. Knowing what I want and trusting what I want are not the same things. Awareness doesn't automatically change behavior. Insight doesn't build trust. And you don't undo a lifetime of conditioning and patterns in just one aha moment. So for me, it came down to 3 things, not all at once, not perfectly, but consistently. And I want to be clear before we go further. It didn't suddenly click for me. To be honest, nothing does. I didn't just wake up one day and magically know what I wanted. I still am figuring that out. Most of the work I'm talking about today is I've been doing for years, slowly, slow work, uncomfortable work, very unsexy work. And it looks a lot like pausing, like slowing down, like saying no more than saying yes. Letting myself not know for a while. And there's a lot of discomfort in that not knowing. Instead of filling those spaces with performance or obligation. There were moments I caught how quickly I still defaulted to those old patterns, how fast I overrode my body, how often I choose what felt familiar instead of what felt true. And I learned what desire feels like when it isn't mixed with pressure, not just pressure from anyone else, but pressure from myself. When it isn't about being easy, fun, or low maintenance, when it isn't about managing someone else's experiences, emotions, or expectations. And it has been a very humbling process. There were times I thought I was listening to myself when really I was just choosing the option that created the least amount of disappointment or disruption. And so I stopped asking big questions at first. I stopped trying to figure out my whole life. And there's a practice that Scott and I have done for years now for our business. It's called the perfect day. And I talked about this last year in my keynote where we sit down once a year and we write out a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what does your perfect day look like? And you get really granular with it. I wake up at this time. I have this for breakfast. This is what I wear. This is how I feel in my body. This is what I didn't do that this year because for the first time I realized I don't really fucking know. I've been making my perfect day every year for years, taking into account, well, where will my kids be? Where will Scott be? What will he be doing? What if this doesn't match what he has on his perfect day? Then what's that mean for us? And so this year, I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm going to figure out what it is I want in this moment instead of reaching years into the future and just be present with it and sit with it. And maybe next year I'll do it because hopefully next year I'll know a little bit more what it is that I actually want. But it feels expansive to do that instead of constricting. I feel it in my body, in the not knowing. It energizes me. Now I know what energizes me. I know what drains me because I can feel those cues in my body. Last night, I did an Irish goodbye at 10:40 and went to bed because I was drained. And I knew if I didn't go to bed, I wouldn't be able to show up today. And I'm not going to apologize for that because you all had a good time. But I want you to hear this part clearly. Learning what you want isn't about getting it right. It's about staying present long enough to notice. And that's why this next part matters, because once you start hearing yourself again, the question becomes, how do I actually trust it? These are 3 ways that have helped me learn to trust my wants again. The first one was start with the smallest yes. This part was brutal for me because I didn't know what my yes felt like without performance. So I did something that felt really extreme. Some of you have heard this story before. I told Scott that I wanted to put a pause on all sexual play. We could still go to lifestyle events, but we weren't going to kiss, we weren't going to touch, we weren't going to have sex. And I couldn't give him any clarity because I had no clarity on it. I just knew I was doing something that didn't feel right, that ache was increasing, and there was no timeline. And I was terrified because I'm telling the man that I love, who has so much joy in the lifestyle, You can't do that anymore until ... until I figure my shit out. And it ended up taking a year. Thankfully, he's a very loving and supporting partner. I mean, he literally was just like, okay, we'll do this. And then every once in a while, he'd be like, so how are we feeling? He'd do little check-ins, very respectfully, very loving, very kind, because I'm not typically the person that would come to him and go, okay, here's where I am with this right now. And he knows that. So he'll come, okay, where are you with this right now? How are you feeling? But that year ended up being one of the best things in our relationship because it taught me to trust my yes and trust my no. But it also is helping him now trust my yes and trust my no. Because I was getting into sexual encounters where we would leave and I would go, yeah, that was great. And then a couple weeks later, after I processed, I'd be like, I didn't really enjoy that. And he was like, you said you had a great time. And I'm like, this is not your fault. He's like, that's very confusing for a partner. So for a while, I was so proud that I learned to say no. And that's so empowering to find your no and mean it, unedited, without explaining. I think it was Ashley Manta who I heard say no is a complete sentence. But honestly, now I'm more proud that I found my yes. Because now when I say yes, I fucking mean it. And it feels good. Self-trust is built through small, repeated, honest choices, not one dramatic decision. So start small, but start. When we finally start telling the truth about what we want, something else shows up almost immediately. And we talked about this in the Women's Connection Circle, or our circle. Fear. Not because you're weak, but because our whole lives have been built around staying safe and not staying whole. Which leads to the second truth. Do not wait for fear to disappear. Fear doesn't always mean that something's wrong. Sometimes it just means that you're doing something new. And that can be very scary. I was afraid to leave my first marriage. I was afraid to step into the lifestyle. I was afraid to use my voice, to choose myself. I was afraid when Scott presented Wild Love Theory. I was afraid when I started removing boundaries and letting go of rules that once made me feel protected. Scott loves kissing. Every woman in here knows that, I'm sure. And 30% of the men. Removing the boundary that he was free to kiss whoever he wanted was fucking scary for me. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I had all of this thoughts. I would catastrophize everything. I was going to places that I had no business going. It was unfamiliar, but it asked me to trust myself in a new way. The fear didn't immediately stop, and the fear didn't mean that I should stop. The fear was something, it didn't mean something was wrong or that I had made a mistake. It meant slow down, don't rush, take your time, and listen. And something started happening in my body. It started to soften, and my chest started to lift. And with repetition, it got easier and easier and easier. I've learned that fear was a cue to just check in, not clamp down, not tighten the rules, not abandon myself or someone else. And once I understood that, things start to shift. Confidence didn't come first, movement did. I didn't need to be confident in that decision. I needed to trust that I trusted him and that I could trust myself. Change doesn't happen in a straight line. It can be spiral. And sometimes that's what it felt like. Like I was coming here and then I was going back down here. And I wish it was linear. That would make things a lot easier. You try, you pull back, you try again. You pull back, you try again. You don't wait for fear to disappear. You move with it, and the more you do, the quieter that fear gets. Not because you're fearless, but because your nervous system learns you can survive on your own courage. The third way to trust yourself, trust your yes, is let your yes and your no be unedited. We soften our truth to protect relationships, to not hurt feelings, to avoid conflict, to manage the emotional temperature of the room. But research on emotional labor shows that chronic self-editing erodes self-trust and leads to anxiety, emotional disconnection. A yes that is filtered is not a yes. And a no that is softened is not a boundary. And I've felt that difference in my body. When I went on my first separate date just a few weeks ago, and said yes, it was an unedited yes, and it felt really good. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. It wasn't a yes shaped around somebody else's comfort. It wasn't a yes that came with explanation or justifications. It was just yes. And my chest lifted. And that was really new for me because that was our first time going separate. This wasn't a hot wife scenario. This was me going on a date with a 6', you're all right, with a 6'6" Brazilian man with the sexiest accent and saying yes. And I was present, I was grounded, I was clear. There was no performance, there was no managing, there was no quiet negotiations in my head. And I felt the same power on the other side at times that I've had to say no, clearly, concisely, and without an explanation. Where Scott will say, I'll say yes to something now. And because it's been 10 years of me saying yes to things I didn't want to do, he's going, are you sure that's a yes? You promise that's a yes? And I'm like, look, I am not going to say yes to anything I don't mean, and I will say no in a heartbeat. No apology, no editing. So even after I promised myself that I wouldn't abandon myself again, I still do slip into old habits because that's familiar, that's safe, that's comfortable. There were moments where I heard my body say no and I talked myself out of it. Moments where I felt that tightening in my chest and I chose to ignore it because it felt easier to stay familiar than to stay honest. So on that first date, so Wild Love Theory, you should come to Scott's keynote on Tuesday at 1 p.m. He talks more about Wild Love Theory. He removed all boundaries from me. I have no rules, none. I have complete autonomy. I can do whatever the fuck I want, whenever the fuck I want to. Not that I couldn't before, but because I love my partner, I wanted to honor his boundaries as well. So the harder work wasn't Scott trusting me. The hardest part was me trusting myself. It wasn't about crossing agreements or pushing limits. It was about learning how to stay present with myself in real time. And there was a moment on my first date where him and I were kissing, and I felt myself start to pull away, not physically, but internally. And I noticed it right away. It was almost a split second that those old patterns started flooding back in. What happens if you let this continue? What is Scott going to feel? How are you going to explain this to him? Is he going to be okay? What will people think in our local community? Because some of our lifestyle friends knew I was on this date. Am I doing something wrong? I felt it immediately, and it started feeling like a sinking ache. And in that moment, I started shaming myself. Like, you are better than this. Like, here you are again. You've been talking about like figuring out what you want and like having full autonomy, and here you are again. And I immediately stopped it. And I was like, listen to your body. What's your body feel? Is your chest lifted? Is the knot in your stomach? And I'm like, this is a yes. This is a yes, and I'm gonna fucking do it. And I'm not gonna think about anybody else. I'm gonna put Scott out of my head. I'm gonna put everybody else out of my head. I'm gonna be present with myself, in my body, and with this person who's in front of me. And that was the most incredible sexual experience, aside from Scott. Because I blocked out the noise. It wasn't because it was like an extreme or wild. We weren't doing like crazy sexual stuff. It was because I was present in my body for the first time in a long time, other than obviously with Scott. I let myself receive, I let myself give, and was just present. That night didn't pull me away from myself because I started to slip. It brought me closer to myself. And here's what I've learned. I didn't get to that moment because I never messed up. I never slipped back into those old patterns. I got there because I finally learned that it's okay to come back to yourself. Self-abandonment used to feel safe. It was a strategy. It helped many of us survive. But once you feel alignment, disconnection gets really loud. So now I notice sooner. I course correct faster. I return to myself with more compassion, more grace, and more courage. The real growth isn't never leaving yourself again. It's learning how to come back faster and faster every single time. And every time you come back, you grow. I'm still becoming, I'm still learning, I'm still writing my book, Who Do You Think You Aren't? I don't have to be a finished product because I'm still uncovering parts of myself, and I hope I always continue to discover myself even more. Those parts that have been conditioned and labeled and hidden or afraid. Here's what I know with my whole heart. Your life begins when you stop asking, who do they want me to be, and start asking, who am I becoming and what do I really want? You don't need to be finished to begin. You don't need to be fearless to move forward. You don't need permission to want. Your desire isn't here to blow up your life. It's here to bring you back to yourself. So as you move through the rest of this week, surrounded by people who are growing, learning, exploring, healing, laughing, connecting, and questioning, remember this. This isn't a week to perform liberation. You don't have to have it right. You don't have to be bold all of the time. And you definitely don't have to have it all figured out by Saturday. This is a week to practice, to tell the truth a little more honestly, to listen to your body a little sooner, to notice when you're choosing safety over alignment, and to gently choose yourself anyway. This is a space where desire is allowed, where truth is welcome, and where you can't fail as long as you stay honest with yourself. Your desire isn't random, it's information. Your want isn't selfish, it's wisdom. And this week you get to practice choosing yourself, not perfectly, but intentionally, again and again and again. The real question is not who do you think you are, but who do you think you aren't anymore? And what is it that you actually desire? So you don't have to know the answer, and that's okay. It's still early in the week. So this week, thank you for coming. Have fun. Have real, authentic conversations. There's so many beautiful people here this week with amazing stories. Ask the questions. Listen to people's stories. You can glean so much just from hearing somebody else's lived experience and how they came from this point and got to this point and what that looked like and what that felt like. Take advantage of every moment you get to talk with another person here. Not just fuck them, but you should do that too, if you want. But thank you guys for coming today. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Looks good.